It begins not with a bang, but with silence. The uneasy quiet of a world holding its breath. The year is 1939, and the memories of the last Great War are etched into the very landscape of Europe, in the overgrown trenches and in the faces of the men who never truly came home. But this peace was a fragile thing, a ceasefire signed in exhaustion, not a resolution written in understanding. And in the heart of Germany, a new, dark energy was stirring, an ideology of hatred and expansion that would soon demand the world's attention and its blood. This is the story of that cataclysm, a story of a mission so vast, so complex, and so inherently dangerous that, by any rational measure, it was a mission meant to fail, the mission to defeat absolute evil. The Treaty of Versailles, signed in 1919, was not a peace treaty, but a sentence. It carved up empires, imposed impossible reparations on Germany, and planted a seed of bitter resentment in the heart of a nation already humiliated. From this fertile ground of anger and economic despair, a new political movement grew, one built on national pride, scapegoating, and the mesmerizing, terrifying oratory of one man, Adolf Hitler. His National Socialist Party promised to restore Germany to its former glory, to tear up the treaty and to purify the nation by removing those he deemed undesirable. In 1933, he became chancellor, and democracy in Germany died quietly, replaced by the jackboot march of totalitarianism. With chilling speed, he dismantled civil liberties, mobilized industry for war, and forged a new military doctrine of overwhelming, concentrated force. Blitzkrieg, lightning war. The world watched, hoping for peace, but preparing for nothing. When German troops marched into the demilitarized Rhineland, the world did nothing. When they annexed Austria, the world did nothing. And when they turned their gaze to the Sudetenland of Czechoslovakia, the leaders of Britain and France, desperate to avoid another war, met with Hitler in Munich. They returned home waving a piece of paper promising peace for our time. They had sacrificed a nation for an illusion. 1 year later, on September 1, 1939, the illusion shattered. German panzer divisions, supported by screaming Stuka dive bombers, poured across the border into Poland. The lightning had struck. The mission to stop it had already begun, and it was already failing. The invasion of Poland was a brutal demonstration of a new kind of warfare. While the world still imagined the static battle lines of 1914-1918, the Germans combined tanks, aircraft, and mobile infantry in a synchronized, devastating punch. The Polish cavalry, brave and doomed, charged against steel and found no glory, only annihilation. In weeks, the country was overrun. Britain and France, honoring their treaty with Poland, declared war, but it was a declaration with little immediate action. A period that became known as the Phony War. The real storm was still gathering. In the spring of 1940, it broke with terrifying fury. Hitler turned west. Denmark fell in hours. Norway was subdued. Then the main assault came not through the heavily fortified French border, but through the dense, impenetrable Ardennes forest. The German panzer armies, a steel serpent miles long, emerged behind the Allied lines, cutting off the British Expeditionary Force and the best of the French army, trapping them against the sea at a small port called Dunkirk. What followed was not a victory, but a miracle of survival. A flotilla of over 800 civilian boats, fishing trawlers, pleasure yachts, lifeboats, joined the Royal Navy in a desperate, chaotic evacuation under constant Luftwaffe attack. Over 338,000 soldiers were rescued from the beaches. An army saved to fight another day, but an army that had left all its equipment and a continent behind. France, proud and powerful for centuries, capitulated in just 6 weeks. The German victory parade down the Champs-Élysées was a scene of profound humiliation. Europe now lay in shadow, from the Atlantic coast to the newly carved death camps in occupied Poland. Only an island nation, led by a defiant bulldog of a man named Winston Churchill, remained. His voice echoed over the radio waves, a lone beacon in the gathering dark. We shall fight on the beaches, we shall fight on the landing grounds, we shall fight in the fields and in the streets. We shall never surrender. With France conquered, Hitler believed Britain would sue for peace. He underestimated Churchill's resolve. The only way to force a British surrender was to invade, and the only way to invade was to control the skies over the English Channel. Thus began the Battle of Britain, the first major battle to be fought entirely in the air. The Luftwaffe, vast and battle-hardened, threw its might against the few squadrons of the Royal Air Force. The pilots of the RAF, young men from Britain and across the Commonwealth as well as exiles from Poland and Czechoslovakia, became known as the Few. Outnumbered, they fought with a courage that defied logic, guided by the new technology of radar. They lived and died in the brilliant, terrifying blue of the English sky. The strain was immense. Pilots were scrambled multiple times a day, surviving on adrenaline and sheer will. The tide began to turn when a German bomber accidentally hit London, prompting a retaliatory British raid on Berlin. In a fit of rage, Hitler ordered the Luftwaffe to shift its attacks from the airfields and radar stations to the cities. The Blitz had begun. For 57 consecutive nights, London was pounded by high explosives and incendiary bombs. But this shift in strategy was a fatal mistake. It gave the RAF the breathing room to repair its airfields and regroup. The Luftwaffe had been bled dry. Hitler's invasion plans were indefinitely postponed. For the first time, the German war machine had been checked. But as one front closed, another, vaster one was about to erupt. In the Pacific, an expansionist Japan, bogged in a brutal war in China, saw the European colonial powers as vulnerable. To secure the oil and resources it needed, it planned a daring, preemptive strike. On December 7, 1941, a quiet Sunday morning, waves of Japanese aircraft descended on the American naval base at Pearl Harbor, Hawaii. In less than 2 hours, the U.S. Pacific Fleet was devastated. The next day, America was at war. The conflict was now truly a world war. Churchill, upon hearing the news, wrote, "So we had won after all. Hitler's fate was sealed, Mussolini's fate was sealed. As for the Japanese, they would be ground to powder." The mission had just gained a powerful, if wounded, new ally. War is not just about soldiers and battles. It's about the systematic dismantling of humanity. Nowhere was this more horrifyingly true than in the Nazi-occupied territories of Eastern Europe. While the war raged on the front lines, a different, more insidious war was being waged against civilians. This was the implementation of the final solution to the Jewish question, a bureaucratically organized, industrially efficient plan for the extermination of an entire people. It began with laws, the Nuremberg laws that stripped Jews of their citizenship, their jobs, their dignity. It escalated to violence, Kristallnacht, the night of broken glass, where synagogues burned and shops were looted, and it culminated in genocide. Jews, along with Roma, Slavs, disabled persons, political dissidents, and countless others deemed unworthy of life, were rounded up from their homes, packed into cattle cars, and transported to camps with names that would forever be synonymous with evil: Auschwitz, Treblinka, Sobibor. Upon arrival, they were subjected to a selection. The old, the young, the sick were sent immediately to the gas chambers, told they were going to showers. Their bodies were then plundered for gold fillings and hair and burned in crematoria that operated day and night. Those deemed fit for labor were worked, starved, and beaten to death. The story of Anne Frank, a young Jewish girl hiding with her family in a secret annex in Amsterdam, became a poignant symbol of the millions of stolen lives. Her diary, filled with the ordinary hopes of a teenager, stands as a testament to the human spirit in the face of unimaginable darkness. This was not collateral damage. It was the central, hideous goal. The mission to defeat the Axis was no longer just about geopolitical victory. It was a moral imperative, a desperate race to close the gates of hell before millions more were consumed. While the West was fixated on the Channel and the Pacific, the largest and most brutal land war in human history was being fought on the Eastern Front. In June 1941, Hitler had launched Operation Barbarossa, the invasion of the Soviet Union, betraying his non-aggression pact with Stalin. It was a war of annihilation, driven by Nazi racial ideology that viewed the Slavic peoples as subhuman. For the first year, the German advance seemed unstoppable. Millions of Soviet soldiers were captured and died in makeshift POW camps. But the vastness of Russia, its brutal winter, and the stubborn, desperate resistance of the Red Army began to take their toll. The turning point came at a city on the Volga River that bore the Soviet leader's name, Stalingrad.
Hitler was obsessed with taking it. Stalin was equally obsessed with holding it. The battle descended into a street-by-street, room-by-room meat grinder. Soldiers fought with knives and entrenching tools in the rubble of a shattered city. The average life expectancy of a Soviet soldier was less than 24 hours. The German Sixth Army, one of the finest in the Wehrmacht, was bled white. In a brilliant counteroffensive, the Soviets encircled the entire German force. Hitler forbade any attempt to break out, demanding they fight to the last man. Trapped, starving, and freezing in the Russian winter, the remnants of the Sixth Army surrendered in February 1943. It was a catastrophic defeat from which the German army on the Eastern Front would never recover. The tide had turned. The Soviet Union began its long, bloody march west, a march of liberation and vengeance. The mission was no longer about survival, it was about the advance. While the Soviets bore the brunt of the German war machine, the Western Allies debated how and where to strike back. Churchill advocated for an attack on the soft underbelly of Europe, first clearing North Africa of the German-Italian forces led by the brilliant but erratic Desert Fox, Field Marshal Erwin Rommel. In the vast, unforgiving deserts, a new kind of armored warfare was perfected. The British Eighth Army, under the leadership of the charismatic General Bernard Montgomery, finally defeated Rommel at the Second Battle of El Alamein in late 1942. Churchill would later say, "Before Alamein, we never had a victory. After Alamein, we never had a defeat." Simultaneously, American forces under General Dwight D. Eisenhower landed in Morocco and Algeria in Operation Torch, squeezing the Axis forces in a pincer movement. With North Africa secured, the Allies invaded Sicily and then, in September 1943, mainland Italy. The Italian government quickly surrendered, but the German forces in Italy dug in. The Italian campaign became a slow, grinding, and bloody affair. The terrain was a defender's dream, mountainous, easily fortified. The fight for Monte Cassino, an ancient monastery turned into a German fortress, lasted for months and cost thousands of lives. It was a bitter preview of the difficulties of fighting in Western Europe. Yet it tied down German divisions that could have been used elsewhere. The mission was progressing, but at a terrible, measured cost. The moment of decision had arrived. For 2 years, the Allies had been planning and building an immense invasion force in Britain. The goal? Operation Overlord, the amphibious landing on the coast of Nazi-occupied France. It was the most complex and risky military operation in history. The man entrusted with its command was General Dwight D. Eisenhower. On his shoulders rested the fate of the free world. The Atlantic Wall, a series of German coastal fortifications, was formidable. The weather was a constant, terrifying variable. The night before the invasion, Eisenhower wrote a note accepting full responsibility for the failure should it occur, and tucked it in his wallet. On June 6, 1944, D-Day began. Shortly after midnight, thousands of paratroopers dropped behind enemy lines to secure key bridges and roads. At dawn, an armada of over 5,000 ships began disgorging landing crap onto 5 beaches: Utah, Omaha, Gold, Juneau, and Sword. The American forces at Omaha Beach faced the fiercest resistance. They were pinned down on a narrow strip of sand, raked by machine gun and artillery fire from the cliffs above. The water ran red. Yet through sheer courage and the leadership of junior officers and NCOs who rallied their men, they inched forward, blowing gaps in the obstacles and scaling the bluffs. By the end of that longest day, a precarious foothold had been established in France. The battle for Normandy was not over. It will take weeks of brutal fighting in the dense hedgerow country to finally break out. But the second front was open. The noose was tightening. The liberation of Europe had begun. With the Allies breaking out of Normandy and the Soviets launching a massive summer offensive, Operation Bagration, that annihilated an entire German army group, the end seemed near. But Hitler had one last surprise. In December 1944, he launched a massive counter-offensive through the dense Ardennes forest, aiming to split the Allied armies and recapture the port of Antwerp. Caught off guard, the American line bulged, giving the battle its name, the Battle of the Bulge. The initial assault was aided by poor weather, which grounded Allied air power. Atrocities were committed, most infamously the Malmedy massacre, where German SS troops murdered dozens of American POWs. But American soldiers, often outnumbered and surrounded, fought with desperate bravery. The The defense of the key crossroads at Bastogne by the 101st Airborne Division became legendary. When called upon to surrender, the American commander, General Anthony McAuliffe, sent back a one-word reply: nuts. The skies eventually cleared, allowing Allied aircraft to pummel the German spearheads. The Bulge was slowly pushed back. It was Germany's last major offensive in the West. It had delayed the Allied advance, but at a cost the Germans could no longer afford. As spring 1945 arrived, the Western Allies and the Soviets raced towards the heart of the Reich. The world was about to see the true cost of the Nazi nightmare. Soviet soldiers liberating the extermination camp at Auschwitz found the emaciated survivors and the horrific machinery of death. The evidence was irrefutable. The mission was now one of justice as much as victory. By April 1945, the Third Reich was in its death throes. American and Soviet soldiers shook hands at the Elbe River, cutting Germany in two. In his bunker deep beneath the Chancellery in Berlin, a crumbling, paranoid Hitler blamed everyone but himself for the catastrophe. On April 30th, as Soviet troops fought from building to building just above him, he committed suicide. A week later, on May 8, 1945, the German High Command surrendered unconditionally. VE Day, victory in Europe, was celebrated with joy and relief across the Western world. But the war was not over. In the Pacific, the fight against Japan continued with unrelenting ferocity. Island-hopping campaigns at Iwo Jima and Okinawa had shown that the Japanese would fight to the last man, inflicting horrific casualties. An invasion of the Japanese home islands promised a bloodbath of unimaginable scale. The United States had a new, terrible weapon, born from the secret Manhattan Project. On August 6, 1945, a B-29 bomber named the Enola Gay dropped an atomic bomb on the city of Hiroshima. The city vanished in a flash of light and heat. 3 days later, a second bomb fell on Nagasaki. The world had entered the nuclear age. On August 15th, Emperor Hirohito announced Japan's surrender. The mission, the most dangerous and costly in human history, was over. It had succeeded, but at a price that would haunt generations. The cost of the mission was staggering. An estimated 70 to 85 million people lay dead, the majority of them civilians. Entire cities across Europe and Asia were reduced to rubble. The geopolitical map was redrawn. Europe, the former center of global power, was now a shattered continent, divided between a capitalist West and a communist East. A new conflict, the Cold War, already brewing. To prevent such a catastrophe from ever happening again, the United Nations was founded in 1945. The full, horrifying truth of the Holocaust was laid bare, leading to the Nuremberg trials, where the principle was established that individuals are responsible for their actions, even in war. The mission to defeat absolute evil had been accomplished, but it left behind a world forever changed, sobered by the knowledge of what humanity was capable of, both of inflicting and of enduring. The soldiers came home, but the war never truly left them. They had seen the abyss and they had stared back. They had completed a mission so dangerous it was meant to fail. And in doing so, they gave us, the generations that followed, a profound and solemn responsibility: to remember, to learn, and to ensure that such a mission is never, ever necessary again.